Hey Wolfpack, and welcome back. I'm finally starting to feel quite better. Not really too sure as to what I had, but I'm happy it's just about gone. So, finally back today with more stories. And today, we're reading 3 more deathly encounters. But before we start, what is your favorite thing about fall? Comment down below. I'd love to hear it. So, with that said, whether you're sitting around a campfire, on the night shift, or even laying in bed, let my voice soothe your nightmares. I murdered Aaron Harper, my closest friend. I stabbed him right in the heart. Look, I know how it sounds, okay? You probably think I'm some unstable lunatic. I'm not. I'm really not. I bet you would have done the exact same in my situation. I don't have much time, so I'll just start at the beginning. It'll probably make the most sense that way. Winter break had just started, and I was bored out of my mind. I don't really have any major hobbies, and college had taken up much of my time anyways, so it didn't really matter. But now that I had 3 weeks of free time, I had nothing to do. So I had reluctantly resigned myself to spending it sleeping, and maybe binge watching a couple of shows on Netflix when out of the blue, my phone began to ring. When I fished it out of my pocket, I was pleasantly surprised to see that it was Aaron. Aaron is, or was, my best friend all throughout high school. I met him on the first day of freshman year, and we've been completely inseparable ever since. We spent nearly every day together. At least, that's how it used to be. I was surprised because it had been a long time since I had last talked to him. Hell, I think that was my first conversation with him since high school graduation. Why would he call me now? I picked up the buzzing phone and answered the call. "Hey, is this Tay's number?" Aaron's voice immediately came crackling through the phone speaker. "Hey, Aaron. Yes, this is still my number, man." I answered, happy to hear his voice after so long. "Oh, hey! I wasn't sure if you had changed it or not," he had said, a little bit of nervousness creeping into his voice. "What's up? It's been a while since we've talked," I asked, confused about why he called today of all days. "Oh, I've been doing pretty good. My record shop has been pretty successful. How's college?" He spoke quickly, and his voice sounded almost tight, like he was out of breath. There was a good beat of silence before I responded. "College is good. I'm glad to hear that your business is doing good, man," I awkwardly answered, not knowing what to say next. I paused, waiting for him to say something. The silence slowly dragged out, killing the already fairly dry conversation. As it got more uncomfortable, I decided to cut to the chase. "Why'd you call me, Aaron?" I asked, my voice piercing the silence. "Well, I was wondering if you would want to go camping up on Mount Mayworth for a couple days with me." As soon as those words left his lips, I knew I was going. I had to. You see, back when Aaron and I were in high school, we would always camp up on Mayworth every summer, normally with his brother, Jason. It was our little tradition. We stopped after graduation, sadly, but I don't remember why. I had to go with him. I couldn't just let our tradition die out completely, and I knew I needed a break from college. "Okay, I'll go," I responded, smiling. Looking back on it, I would have saved myself a lot of trouble if I had just hung up. A couple of hours later, I was outside waiting to be picked up. I hadn't packed much, just some camping gear, my phone, and my old hunting knife. The knife was a gift from Aaron, so it felt fitting. It was a cold day out, I do remember that. Puddles of dark rain water from the previous night still littered the area. It was pooling in every nook and cranny in the street, and it flowed into the storm drains. Into the abyss that was the sewers below. I checked my phone for any text from Aaron. None. It wasn't surprising, to be honest. Aaron was the kind of guy to always be late to everything, no matter how important it was. Hell, I remember back in freshman year, he was a half hour late to his own brother's birthday party. Man, Jason was mad about that. I smiled. The image of Jason giving Aaron a noogie filling my head. I miss those days. Why did we ever stop talking? Just then, I heard an old but nostalgic dirty red pickup driving down the road, splashing through the puddles in the street, with a pair of dim yellow headlights paving a clear path. I looked up from my phone and looked towards the dirty windshield of the truck. Aaron waved at me through the filthy window. I waved back and walked up to the shotgun seat, and there was a light click as Aaron unlocked the door. I opened it and clambered into the truck, putting my backpack on my lap. I shut the door with a thud. Aaron looked a little different from when I had last seen him, but I guess that's to be expected, considering it had been so long. His hair was longer, down to his shoulders. He also wore a large pair of dark sunglasses, and I saw my own reflection staring back at me in those. "So, you ready to head out?" he asked, and in person, I noticed that his voice was slightly different. I can't really place it, but something was different. Once again, this was to be expected. It had been a long while, after all. "Yeah, let's go, man." The drive was, to be honest, really relaxing. Aaron and I talked about our lives, and about how things were in high school. Eventually, the buildings started to become less and less common, slowly replaced by rocks and trees. Before I knew it, the road was gravel, and the looming shadow of Mount Mayworth had enveloped us. Looking up at the enormous mountain, I let sleep take me. Tap, tap, tap. My eyes creaked open, and I nearly had a heart attack when I saw the dark glasses of Aaron looking down at me through the car window. He was smiling at me, slowly tapping the window with his finger. I took a breath, my heart still pounding. It was kind of unnerving, to be honest, just watching him smile at me like that. I cautiously looked around, and I realized that we had arrived at Mayworth. "Hey, wake up! We're here!" Aaron said, which was kind of weird, considering I was clearly already awake, and I was staring up at him. I opened the car door and got out. "Jesus, man, you scared the daylights out of me," I told him. "Sorry," Aaron said simply. I had a feeling he wasn't being sincere, but I decided to drop it just because we were losing daylight. We didn't waste any more time and immediately set out hiking up to our usual spot. The hike was easier than I remembered, and soon we reached a small clearing that was full of many memories of our past excursions. It felt good to be back. We had gotten there just before night came and managed to set up 2 tents and a campfire before it started getting dark. The mountain was exactly how I remembered it. The trees danced silently in the wind, and the campfire crackled and licked at the air. I took a deep breath of crisp mountain air and smiled. I think a break from everything was just what I needed. I gotta remember to thank Aaron for inviting me later. Oh, speaking of Aaron, he emerged from his tent after unpacking. He still had his sunglasses on, and he was watching me sit by the fire. He had this big, giddy smile on his face. Same kind of smile he had when he smiled at me through the car window. "Having fun?" he asked, grinning at me. Yeah," I responded slowly, getting a little uncomfortable with how he was smiling at me. He scratched at his neck, then slapped it. He grinned at me, then slapped it again. "You okay?" Yeah, he repeated. That's when I noticed something strange. His neck, it was rippling. The skin bulged slightly, and he was trying to slap something underneath back into place. I blinked in surprise, and his neck appeared normal. No bulge, just a small red lump. "Damn mosquitoes," he muttered, adjusting his sunglasses. Had I just imagined that? What the hell was that? He took a step towards me, and I felt a spike of adrenaline rush through me. I took a step back from him instinctively and took a breath. "Hey, are you alright? You look pale," he asked, some genuine concern in his voice. I felt in my gut that I had to get away from him. I'm gonna go to bed," I said quickly, getting up and slipping into the safety of my tent. As soon as I finished zipping up, I finally took a breath. Something was horribly wrong with Aaron. I don't know how I knew, but I could feel it in my gut. What was that bulge in his neck? Had I just imagined that? I reached into my bag, taking out the hunting knife I had brought. I fiddled with the knife, my fingers gripping the handle. I debated sleeping with it by my side, just in case. But I decided against it. I put it back into my bag, sighing to myself. I sealed myself in my sleeping bag. I don't remember even falling asleep, but I must have. When I woke, daylight was shining through the tent. I crawled from my sleeping bag, quickly got ready, and stepped outside into the light. The campfire had long burnt out, and the gray sky had enveloped the sun. Aaron's tent was still zipped shut. Must be still asleep, I had thought. Seeing his tent, I remembered what had happened the night before, causing a shudder to ripple across my body. Was that even real? I was tired. Maybe I was just being paranoid. Maybe it was just a mosquito bite. There's absolutely nothing wrong with Aaron. You were tired and seeing things, I said out loud, trying to convince myself. The zipper began moving down the tent. Aaron was awake after all. I quickly turned my attention to the fire, trying to look like I wasn't just watching his tent like a creep. "Oh hey, Tay, you're up already?" I heard his tired voice ask. I slowly turned around to face him. He still wore those shades. Clothing was the same too. He had even taken off his damn shoes to sleep? "Yeah, I'm awake," I said, not taking my eyes off of him. "Great! Hey, I actually wanted to show you something I found up here. It's a little farther up the mountain," he said, walking up and sitting down at the long, dead fire. "What do you want to show me?" I had asked him. "It's kind of a surprise," he responded, letting out a light chuckle. Hearing that chuckle, I felt nostalgia rush through me. After a moment, I made the worst mistake of my life. I lifted my hand to meet his. I was just being paranoid, right? We set out after having breakfast, and I managed to calm down, stupidly thinking that what I had seen the previous night was just in my head. After about half an hour of hiking up the mountain, we made it to a large clearing where the ground stopped going up. In the center of the clearing, there was a large, shimmering lake. The lake didn't ripple. It was completely still, and so murky I couldn't see into it at all. What took up most of my attention, however, was the large, dark stone that came out from the center of the lake. It was like no stone I had ever seen. It was made out of an odd dark material, I think obsidian or something like that. It had gray speckles covering every inch of the stone, and it rose from the center of the lake, at least 10 feet high. The weirdest thing, though, was the dark hole at the base of the stone. It was small, no bigger than a doggy door, and it was so dark I couldn't see what lay beyond it. It was the most hauntingly beautiful thing I had ever seen, that stone. "Pretty cool, huh?" he said, grinning once again. "Yeah," I said, distant, still focused on it. "I found it on a hike last summer. It's insane, right?" He continued. "How the hell have we not found this before? We've hiked nearly every inch of this mountain." I asked, more to myself than anyone. Aaron simply stared at me in response, still grinning. "Aaron?" I asked. "Come on, I want to show you something," he said, completely dodging the question. He then entered the lake, the water soon reaching his knees, then his waist. "Come on!" He beckoned me, and hesitantly I followed, lifting my bag over my head to make sure that it didn't get wet. I felt the icy water envelop my legs, eventually reaching my waist. The floor was unexpectedly smooth. No rocks, no mud, almost like the floor of a swimming pool. We waded through that lake and made our way to the great stone. Aaron hoisted himself up onto a little lip in front of the hole and helped me up and out of the water. I took a breath, shivering from the cold of the water. "Jesus, I'm freezing," I mumbled, trying to shake some of the water off. A moment later, I stood up and faced him. "It's warmer inside," he said flatly, turning towards the hole in the rock. "What? You've been inside?" I asked, surprised. The hole was small. How could he have fit through? "Yeah, it's amazing there," he said, grinning at me again. I felt his eyes bore into me through those sunglasses. I got a horrible sinking feeling in my chest. a deep, horrible sense of dread. I slowly looked from him to the hole, and I no longer felt curiosity and wonder. I felt fear. A deep, black fear that seemed to consume my very soul. Whatever lay beyond that hole, it was evil, and I could sense it. You want me to go in, don't you? I asked in a small voice. Yeah, I do, he said, still grinning. But I realized that the grin was not because he was hanging with a friend, but because he had successfully lured me into a trap. That's when I realized Aaron was no longer my friend. I think we both know I'm not going in there, I said with surprising confidence. He looked a bit disappointed. He sighed woefully to himself, and then he lunged at me. Before I could react, he had his hands around my throat, trying to choke me out. I felt his icy hands lock around it, and I struggled madly, desperately trying to get him off of me. His hands were so cold, I kicked and screamed, but he only seemed to falter when I struck him in the face. After his iron grip around my throat began to loosen, I violently pushed him away from me, and I took a swing at him, striking him right in the face. His stupid sunglasses flew off, the lens broken. I smiled, enjoying my small victory, but that joy was killed when he looked up at me, and I saw that instead of his eyes, he had 2 large holes in his face. I gasped in shock, and then it got worse, much worse. Crawling and wriggling, what appeared to be 2 jet-black insectoid limbs began working their way out of the 2 holes in Aaron's face, like some kind of demented wasp's nest that had been disturbed. His mouth opened, and a 3rd limb, larger, began to make its way out of his mouth. Upon seeing this, I wisely turned and dove into the water, trying to swim away from that place and away from Aaron as fast as I possibly could, but it was in vain. Aaron dove in and landed right on top of me. I felt the wind get knocked out of me and my mouth fill with icy water before I could force it closed. I felt Aaron hold me under the water, pressing my head down. Aaron was always stronger than me, even back in high school. I thrashed madly, but I eventually gave up, realizing that this is how I would die. Then, everything slowly turned black. I didn't expect to wake up, but I did. I couldn't see at first. Everything was dark. I was lying on something cold and hard. I slowly tried to get up in order to get my bearings, but I ended up knocking my head on something only 3 feet up. As my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I realized that I was in a room of some kind. It was a large, circular room, but the ceiling only went about 3 feet up, making it impossible to stand. The entirety of the walls, the floor, and the ceiling were made up of that same kind of stone from the massive black stone in the lake. The only light in the room was a soft, glowing fluorescent blue color radiated from the spaces where the floor met the walls. Small, pale blue pods clung to the ceiling randomly. They were tiny, pea-sized, and seemed to grow in clusters. They smelled awful and looked slimy. I decided not to touch any, even with this light. It was difficult to see. I was in the middle of the room, and around 10 feet ahead of me was Aaron, on all fours, faced away from me. That wasn't the weird part, though. The weirdest part was that he was on the ceiling. After a quiet, tense moment, I knew that Aaron, or whatever the hell it was, didn't know I had awoken yet. Maybe it thought it had killed me. It doesn't matter now. All that matters is that I have a window of opportunity to get the hell out of here. I looked around for any kind of exit. Anything. My eyes scanned the left side. Nothing. Nothing besides... Are those bones? Don't think about it. I scanned the right, and there it was, a small hole in the wall that led to an exit. Maybe. Hopefully. I slowly began to make my way towards the hole, avoiding the pale blue pods. But it was like a minefield. Just one step at a time. I could feel my pack scraping against the ceiling. Just one step at a time. I tried to hide the sound of my terrified breathing. Just one step at a time. I could hear him scratching at the 2 cavities where his 2 warm brown eyes should have been. I was just 3 steps to salvation. 2 steps. Then, a crack shattered the silence, and my hope of escaping without being spotted, shattering along with it. I slowly forced my head to look down. I had broken some kind of bone. I think it was once a finger. I looked back at Aaron and jumped back, screaming when I found him mere inches away. Had he known I was awake the whole time? He skittered towards me, mouth wide open. I lifted my boot-clad foot and kicked him in the mouth. He fell back, a shriek escaping from his mouth. I kicked him again, then a third time, and I felt his nose flatten against my boot. Aaron let out a much more human-sounding scream, and I crawled madly through the hole. The hole led into a tunnel. I could hear him screaming behind me. I crawled and clawed up the steady incline of the tunnel. I didn't care when I felt the cloth and skin tearing off of my knees and my elbows. He was getting louder. I don't know how anyone could ever scream so loud. Looking back on it, I didn't even feel like I was in control. Like some primitive survival instinct took over and I was just in the back seat. I only really started to notice the pain when I crawled out of the tunnel and into the light, and I saw how badly I was bleeding. The light itself was blinding at first, but soon I realized that I was back on the rock in the lake. Aaron must have dragged me down there once he thought I was dead. I didn't waste time. I couldn't. I dove into the water, and I bit down the pain I felt from the agony of my cuts touching the water. I swam as fast as I could away from that hell, but I heard a splash in the water. He was coming for me. I had just barely reached the shore when his fingers snatched my ankle. I yelled and kicked at his fingers. I heard one of his fingers break, but he did not let go. Aaron tried to drag me back into the depths of the lake, back towards the stone. No! No! I screamed. I couldn't bear going back there. I kicked and clawed. By some miracle, I managed to slip out of the boot he gripped, and I got up and bolted into the forest. My entire body felt like it was on fire. Blood ran down my arms and my shins. Never in my entire life had I ever ran as fast as I ran then. But it was inevitable. Aaron caught up to me. He clawed at my pack, managing to grab one of the straps. I felt myself get ripped back, and Aaron started whipping me around like a rag doll. He had to have some kind of supernatural strength, because he was so strong that he lifted me. My feet didn't even touch the ground. When he finally threw me, I flew through the air for a long second, feeling my heart go up into my throat. Before crashing into the ground, gasping and coughing, I got up. Aaron looked even worse than before. I could see his purple and blue veins bulging beneath his skin, and they were moving, writhing and wriggling like worms or snakes under his skin. His broken nose was crooked at an odd angle, the insectoid appendages still reaching out at me from his eye sockets. "Tay, help me, please," Aaron gargled out. Was Aaron still in there? Was the person I once knew still there? "Please, kill me." Aaron choked out, and that was the last thing he ever said, because his head suddenly split open, revealing the source of the insectoid appendages. It was jet black, and it looked like a horrible mix between a huntsman spider and a cockroach. It was coiled around his broken skull, and I could see that it was attached to his brainstem. Having severed his spine from his head, I realized that the bulge I had seen that night before was probably part of his vertebrae. It was controlling him like some kind of demented meat puppet. But that was Aaron, the real Aaron, talking to me. Was he still there? Trapped in his own mind while his body was used as a puppet? I couldn't let that creature do that to him. I couldn't let that thing exist. I knew what I had to do. For Aaron's sake. I took off my pack and took out my hunting knife, dropping the pack to the ground. It was the knife Aaron had given me, the one I had brought. It was fitting. I charged Aaron and managed to stab him right in the heart. Blood splattered across my face and I heard a strange gurgling sound. Maybe it was Aaron trying to scream. The knife sank nearly to the handle, and Aaron dropped like a rock to the forest floor. Almost immediately, the insect leapt from Aaron's head and onto my face. It vomited a bunch of foul-tasting white foam all over it, making a horrible screeching noise that reminded me of a cicada buzzing. I coughed and gagged. The foam tasted like a mix of moldy cheese and spoiled fruit. The disgusting insect crawled all over my body. I frantically wiped away the foam. I realized that it was riddled with those little blue pods from the place under the lake. I swung wildly with a knife at the insect, slashing off one of its front appendages. It squealed and tried to scurry away, but I didn't let it get far. I raised the bloody knife and made sure that that thing was dead. Then it was just over. Everything got real quiet, and the smell and the pain started to set in. I cried for a while. I buried the knife and Aaron. Then I walked down the mountain. Everything was a haze, but I think a hiker found me. They brought me back and I talked to the cops. I told them Aaron disappeared after we went on a hike. I explained away my injuries is from a rough fall I had taken while searching for him. If I had told them the truth of the insect and the strange rock in the lake, I'd probably be in prison right now, or a psych ward. After a week or so in the hospital, I went home. Now, I'm here, writing this all out for God knows who. I know you'll probably believe that this note is just the ramblings of an insane person who went nuts, killed their best friend, and blamed it on a fantasy monster, and is now confessing their sins on paper. But, if you want to believe that, I can't really convince you otherwise. But there is a reason I decided to write this all out. When I first got home, I noticed that the veins on my wrist were moving. I also noticed that it's been getting harder to see, even now as I write this. I can feel things crawling around underneath my skin. The pods in the white foam, I must have swallowed one. Or maybe a couple. Doesn't matter. I have a jerry can full of gasoline and a lighter. After I finish writing this, I'll go into my shower, set myself on fire, and make sure those fucking things can't use my body. I don't know how much longer I'll be the one in control, so I'll leave you with this. If you ever find a strange, shimmering lake with a stone in the middle of it up in a mountain, run like hell. Some places should be left alone. This comes from someone who claims to be a former forensic investigator that worked for a few precincts in upstate New York. To clarify, I have no personal ties to this person, don't know why they specifically reached out to me, or felt this page was their only remaining option to tell their story. I'm simply passing along what they said, and will leave it to your own interpretation. After conducting my own research, however, I will say their theories are plausible, and whoever this is genuinely believes they've uncovered something heinous. Here's the account I received, told in their point of view. I worked as a forensic investigator in New York State's Delaware and Columbia counties. I've seen many fair share of crime scenes, from child deaths at ages they had no business of even entertaining such thoughts, to gruesome accidents and murder victims killed in the worst ways imaginable. There were 3 particular cases whose backstories compelled me to dig deeper, even after the official investigations concluded. What I found made me question the extents of reality, human depravity, and avarice. The first happened in East Chatham, December 1986. A teen, who I will refer to as Will, murdered 4 of his family members, seeming to be driven by financial gain. All 4 bodies were discovered in their bedrooms, dying from gunshot wounds to the head. Despite being described as a shallow, detached individual, Will excelled in school and was thought to have a bright future. His family was very active in the community and owned a successful business, which made these murders especially stunning. The teen readily confessed when questioned, but wasn't very forthcoming on certain crime scene details. Dozens of candles placed on top of coins scattered around the house. Inscriptions written in blood on the living room floor, most of which we couldn't document because they were repeatedly tracked all over before we arrived. And the bodies all being smeared with an oily light green substance. The coroner reports on all 4 bodies described their wounds as narrow, bullet-shaped holes entering through the victim's forehead and exiting through the back. The exit wounds looked nothing like those made by bullets. No casings or rounds were found, and tests for gunpowder residue were incidentally damaged at the lab by a pipe burst. While the official report said all 4 victims died from gunshots, it was technically never proven. Thinking they had sufficient evidence, detectives saw no need to investigate further after Will confessed, and overlooked these bizarre details. Although, the determined Will, who claimed to have no recollection of that night, suffered a psychotic breakdown. I always suspected he had an ulterior motive. Any attempts at deciphering what was written on the living room floor was futile, except for one semi-legible phrase, Judoc. The light green slippery substance slathered on all 4 bodies were also identified as money oil, an herbal remedy used in witchcraft that supposedly brings prosperous wealth. Although many acknowledged that there was a lot more going on. Everyone ultimately wanted to move forward and minimize the attention East Chatham was receiving from this tragedy. In the end, I understood the desire to put this dark chapter of East Chatham's history behind us, and eventually accepted I wouldn't learn any more about what happened than what was already known. Fast forward a few years later, when I was working in Delaware County, the second case happened in June 1989, another mass murder that conjured up memories of East Chatham. A 23-year-old, who I'll call Evan, murdered his family at their cabin outside Stamford, lit candles placed on top of coins littered at the home, where 4 bodies were found in the house's attic. Initially perceived as gunshots, the autopsy report explained their wounds as being bullet-shaped entrances that completely went through the victim's body. Unlike the East Chatham killings, these murder victims contained several deep perforations. The bodies were centered around a strange symbol that seemed to depict a blocky, crookedly drawn uppercase B. A small backwards J protruded from the B's lower left corner, while a jagged uppercase T branched off its top left end. The emblem was drawn with a scorched powder that, based on samples recovered, had an initial light green color that was composed of different herbs. It looked like Evan had been interrupted in the middle of whatever he was doing, prompting him to flee. He was cornered at an abandoned farm in a neighboring county, which ensued a lengthy standoff, before being gunned down after opening fire on police. Officers on scene recalled Evan kept screaming he was so close, needed to complete the circle and finish the process. One bizarre piece of evidence was a black envelope Evan pinned on his family's business storefront sometime after committing the murders. It was covered in green wax and contained burnt remnants of the paper that, from the few strands that were salvaged, appeared to be some kind of letter or note. Although Evan apparently had several mental issues, the dismissive explanation for his appalling actions disregarded some alarming details. Evan was apparently obsessed with money and wealth, to the point where it influenced him at a cognitive level. He stood to assume his entire family estate, which, according to friends of his, Evan incessantly pondered about the liquid value of and what he'd do with all that cash. When I disputed the investigation's conclusions, my police chief gave a familiar explanation. "Evan's dead," he said. "No need to allocate time and resources to an already solved case." Even after noting every similarity with the East Chatham murders, he wouldn't entertain any further inquiries, and eventually reassigned me to another division. It was after this I learned the powdery substance found in the attic was identified as money powder, which had many similar vegetal ingredients as its oleaginous counterpart, money oil. Despite violating orders and the abundance of department codes, I started my own secret investigation trying to connect these cases. There was too much overlap between them that I couldn't let this go without leaving no stone unturned. Both killings were committed by young men with financial motives. They murdered their families in near identical manners. Candles placed on top of coins and substances made from the same materials were found at both crime scenes. Although I was convinced Will and Evan were trying to perform the same or closely related rituals, my evidence was circumstantial at best. I needed a direct link connecting them that would give my theory the credence necessary to be taken seriously. About a year into my independent probe, a case from February 1988 in Groveland, New York, was brought to my attention. A man I'll call Larry murdered his whole family before committing suicide and setting their house on fire. After extinguishing the blaze, police discovered 5 bodies. Larry killed his wife and 3 children, who were each found lying in their beds. Although gunshots were officially deemed all 5 victims' causes of death, Larry was the only one described as being explicitly caused by a firearm. His wife and kids died from what the documents described as wounds closely resembling a gunshot that completely passed through the victim's cranial region. For me, there were 2 affirming details in the case that connected to the East Chatham and Stamford killings. Investigators determined the fire was started by lighting a charred black envelope. The note inside was too badly burned and no longer legible, but this envelope looked exactly like the one Evan pinned on his family's storefront. Larry also had a tattoo on his back matching the symbol found at the Stamford case, a jagged B, with a smaller uppercase T and backwards J, stemming from its corners. I also discovered Larry and his wife were having marital problems, which derived from a crippling financial situation that put them on the precipice of ruin. Finding this case led to more chilling discoveries. One regarded an owl rope bracelet with a gold wolf head charm Larry had on his wrist. Will wore the exact same bracelet when he was found, which I neglected to mention earlier. Despite living in Groveland when murdering his family, Larry settled there fairly recently, having lived most of his life in Shonair County. Not only did he own a business in East Chatham from 1983 to 1985 where Will happened to work for 8 months, but the abandoned farmhouse where Evan made his final stand was on land formerly owned by Larry's family. I delved further into Larry's background, although information was hard to come by. It led me to learning about Lupus Verdus, meaning green wolf in Latin. What little I found described them as some kind of fraternal order where Larry was a member. The only other details I uncovered about Lupus Verdus was that they were formerly headquartered in a now abandoned lodge located somewhere between Medusa and South Westerlo, roughly the midway point between East Chatham and Stamford. The lodge burned down in the summer of 1989, after which the organization appeared to cease operations. The former lodge's dilapidated remains still stand today. I spent months trying to uncover more about Lupus Verdus, but had stagnant progress, and came to a barrage of dead ends. Shortly after, however, my rogue investigation was halted after being discovered by the DA's office. Although no charges were pressed, the police confiscated most of my documents and case files, after which I was swiftly terminated. A few years passed, when something seemingly out of the blue happened, but dragged me back down this rabbit hole. I woke up one morning to find hundreds of papers which came from a filing cabinet filled with old files I still had on these cases that the police somehow missed, littering the room where they were kept. Written on every one of those papers was a 6-letter word: Mammon. It was written in what appeared to be blood, and I initially neglected to mention the filing cabinet holding these old documents was in my bedroom. I couldn't let anyone know these files were still in my possession, so I took to the internet, where I gained a lot of perturbing insight on the word's meaning. Mammon was a theological demonic entity representing greed and want, who promised its worshippers boundless wealth. I almost fell over after first seeing Mammon's sigil, a distorted B with an uppercase T and a backwards J, jutting from its upper and lower left corners. It was the same symbol found in Will's attic and tattooed on Larry's back. This led me to read up on the different rituals for summoning Mammon. They varied in complexity, and many involved using specific items like candles, coins, owl rope, herbal remedies like money oil and powder, along with writing letters and requests to Mammon that you burn or place in black envelopes. I was especially bothered by a redundant detail of Mammon's appearance that was in quite a few visual depictions of the being. Many had Mammon brandishing a long, narrow spike that retracted from its wrist, which was used to impale its victims' bodies. The stories I read said Mammon extract people's soul in this grisly manner, which were added to a collection it amassed over the millennia. It made me think about the wounds every one of those cases murder victims had, which every report was quick to write off as gunshots. What else could create that type of opening? Were those poor souls truly at rest, or suffering a far worse fate? Mammon also appeared frequented in form of a wolf, which made sense of the fraternal order being named Lupus Verdus, and those owl rope bracelets worn by Will and Larry having wolf head charms. I also don't think the dates all three massacres occurred were randomly chosen. Will killed his family on December 13th, when the feast of St. Judic is held. Judic, the word we found written on the East Chatham crime scene, was a young, wealthy prince who gave up his opulence to become a priest. He lived a life of modesty, solitude, and was said to be a staunch adversary of Mammon, since he stood against everything the demon represented, apparently. Using blood to write the names of you or your deity's antagonists is a form of mockery and scorn in occultism that supposedly appeases and empowers your idol. The Stamford murders happened on June 22nd, which falls on the summer solstice, whose signified period of growth is considered an opportune time to summon certain beings, and when the season of Mammon begins. Larry's murder-suicide occurred on February 28th, 1988, which fell on a leap year. In the dark arts, leap years are supposed to provide a window for spirits and other beings to enter our world. It's worth mentioning many works I read about or mentioned Mammon describing him coming in and out of our world using these leap year portals. Having presented my facts, I'll now tell you what I believe happened. Lupus Vertus was secretly a cult dedicated to Mammon, whose members sought wealth and prosperity. Some rituals for summoning this being say flesh and blood offerings yielded greater rewards based on enormity. If done correctly and precisely, I suppose the magnitude of sacrificing one's family was thought to yield endless rewards from this being. Larry recruited Will and Evan, who became indoctrinated by the Order's teachings. My guess is Will failed to properly complete his ritual, causing him to undergo an irreversible mental breakdown. Evan appeared to have gotten interrupted while performing his, likely by police when they arrived at the house. Larry's situation was less clear. He was overcome with grief, either for botching or coming to grips on what he was actually doing during his ritual, and ended his life in response. After how much publicity the Stanford killings got, Lupus Vertus probably decided to vacate the area or go underground, which could explain why their lodge burned. I expectedly made waves when trying to get my findings reviewed and investigate whether Lupus Vertus was still operating. I should have seen it coming, but anyone who even gave me the time of day dismissed my report, saying the evidence was too disputable, circumstantial, and the most insulting of all, inventive. I eventually gave up when my former precincts threatened me with legal action for not turning over all the files and documents I still had, who said I was rehashing settled business that had no need to be revisited. Things settled down for a while afterwards, until something that happened recently. I found a familiar-looking black envelope among some of my spouse's belongings, while clearing out a room that we were renovating. After reading the recently dated letter it contained, I now know I'm not safe in my own home, and have been closely watched by people I known and loved for years on behalf of a certain aforementioned organization. I don't know who to trust or where I'll go, but hope making my story known will help anyone that is, or suspects they're in a similar situation. This goes way deeper than expected, and those cases I used to put this puzzle together may only be the beginning of uncovering what other horrors this entity and its devout followers have committed. Before I start this story, I would like to give a shout out to this author's book, Unclean Spirits Horrifying Stories, Never Sleep Again, on Amazon. The link will be down in the description below and in a pinned comment. With that said, I hope you enjoy. My face is flushed, slick with sweat. My breaths are short and unpleasant. A smile tugs at the corner of his mouth as I turn to my side and close my eyes. I can hear his chest rumble with a chuckle, feel his weight shift on the mattress. The sheets rustle as he shuffles towards me, presses his naked chest up against my back. My muscles tighten as his arm snakes around my waist. His hot breath tickles my neck as he leans over and whispers, "I'm going to kill you." A flash of lightning slices through the darkness, weaves itself into the pale curtains before unraveling with the same suddenness of its arrival. His words hang thick in the shadows that reclaim the room, reverberate with the rumbling thunder. Sleep eludes me, slips away like fog through my fingers. Night's gloom bleeds over into dawn, paints the sky the color of cold steel. A storm is brewing in the metal sky, starting to spit rain at the French windows. My breakfast lies cold and untouched on the small formica table, a bowl of coagulated cereal. The anxiety turning my stomach in knots has left no space for food. The thought of shoveling anything in my mouth makes me want to retch. My hands tremble as I work the knots into his tie and smooth the creases in his dress shirt. Questions swirl and take shape in my brain, then quickly dissipate as he places his hand on my waist. I stifle a whimper and force a smile as he pulls me in, seals his cracked lips on mine. His hand slides up from my waist to the side of my breast to my shoulder before coming to rest at my neck. His thumb caresses the pulsating vein in my throat. He brings his mouth closer to my ear. "I'm going to kill you." Then he is gone. I hear the clicking of boots on floorboards. The front door opens with a crack of thunder. He walks out into the rain, leaving his umbrella behind on the living room couch. He's watching me. I'm in our bedroom folding our laundry. I can see him from the corner of my eye. He's outside, face squished against the window. His mouth begins to crank open like a drawbridge, lower and lower and lower, until I can almost hear the jawbone crack. Thick, red lips drag and smear saliva across the glass. His tongue rolls out, long and pink and fat like a slug, and barbed like a cat, only with bigger and sharper spikes. It starts to scratch perfect circles onto the window pane. Slowly, deliberately, the shrill squeaking of glass makes me shiver. Rain lashes his head, dribbles down his cheeks, and turns the window murky. Yet he stands, watching, licking. I leave the room, step out into the unlit hallway, turn away from the tall silhouette standing still in the corner to my left, just beside the small circular window. I ignore the sound of water sliding down the folds of the tattered cotton suit and dripping onto the carpeted floor, the smacking of lips and sucking of gums and the ravenous, throaty growls as I make my way down the stairs. He's watching me. He's crouching under the dining table, down on all fours, eyes glinting like a feral beast. His skin is pale like candle wax, poreless without any blemishes. He reminds me of a cruel porcelain doll, one that I imagine smashing into 1,000 pieces on the kitchen linoleum. I ignore him, for I must do so until he walks back in through the front door in the evening. He's watching me. Whenever I go, he's there, a roiling black cloud that clings to me like a shadow, spraying just enough rain to chill my spine. Yet it is a cloud whose presence I cannot, must not acknowledge. I hear him walking back and forth closer to the door when I'm in the bathroom, slow, measured steps that make the floorboards sigh. He's there every time I turn a corner or crack a door open, sometimes just inches from my face. His breath licks my nostrils, carries the stench of a corpse decomposing in a bog, makes my eyes water. I'm grateful for the odor, for the opportunity to shed some tears. It's late afternoon, the steel sky has turned charcoal black, rain is lashing the ground in impenetrable sheets. I cannot see him, but I can feel his presence. I know he's somewhere close by, that he's lurking, just a finger's breadth away. I bite my lip and try not to think about why he doesn't want me to see him. All about surprises he might have in store for me, about how exactly he will kill. The doorbell rings, a long and shrill note, the tortured cry of a bird being strangled. It startles me enough to make me drop my coffee mug. A curse passes through my lips at the sight of the stained rug littered with shattered pieces of painted ceramic. The way the rug soaks up the coffee makes me think of someone bleeding on the floor of my living room. How hard is it to clean bloodstains? The doorbell rings again. I jump, again, grit my teeth, take a deep breath, and head for the door. The sound of the raging storm roars into the house as I pull the door open. A solitary figure stands in front of me. It's a little girl, with crooked teeth and a small button nose and shoulder-length black hair tucked into the hood of her bright yellow raincoat. She's holding a heart-shaped box of cookies in her hand. What did she want? I asked. What was she doing out in the rain? Where were her parents? Were they aware she was out in such terrible weather? She doesn't get fazed in the slightest about my hail of questions. Cookies, she says. We must sell them before the week is out. In this weather? Builds character, she answers. And her parents? Her father was out working, her babysitter was sick, and her mother died 6 months ago. My heart seizes in my chest. The realization hits me with the force of a baseball bat to my face. I recognize who she is, who her mother was, and how she had died all those months ago. Animal attack, they'd say. Mauled beyond recognition. Only I knew the truth. It wasn't an animal. At least, not one any of them had ever seen. No known animal could conjure up such precise and cruel brutality. I remembered how the girl's mother had stood on my doorstep that day, much like her own daughter. She'd introduced herself as a member of the local HOA, welcomed me to the neighborhood, told me about the timings of the garbage truck, about the best schools in the area, and the restaurants we needed to check out as soon as possible. She had such a boisterous and infectious laugh. One couldn't help but smile in her company. I tried to warn her about him, But she didn't listen. Couldn't listen. Every time she tried, a dazed look would cross her face, and she would start mumbling something nonsensical before moving on with the conversation like I hadn't said anything at all. She didn't notice him, didn't hear the rustle of shrubs and the rapping of boots on the stone as he eased out of the bushes and came and stood right beside her, erect like a rod of iron. She didn't see him, didn't see the look of fear on my face, the helplessness that made my face scrunch up. The sounds that make up the symphony of her death haunt me to this day. The wet tearing of a throat being opened, and the sound of blood gushing out. Of her jovial laughter melting into gurgling and choking, the weak thud of her body folding and hitting the ground, and then the sound of sharp, jagged teeth crunching on bone and flesh. Even in death, she seemed unaware of what had killed her. I didn't warn anyone else about him ever again. Knew it was useless. I came out of my reverie with a start. My eyes water and flutter. The girl is looking at me, expectantly. I invite her in, take her raincoat, and spread it over the plastic patio chair. She chooses to sit on the carved and padded ladder-back chair in front of the couch, refuses my offer of food and drink. I settle into the couch, next to my dry umbrella, and prepare to ask her some questions about her mother, but she cuts me off and starts rambling about the cookies in a voice sweeter than saccharin. The adventurefuls taste of caramel, she says, and the Thin Mints are to die for. She doesn't have lemonades because she doesn't like the taste of lemons. Her mother loved s'mores. Used to say that miracle happened when good things come together, like chocolate and marshmallows, and you know what? That one time. The front door creaks open, a gust of wind sprays rain onto the welcome mat, black boots click on wood. He is here. A nerve in my jaw twitches as he saunters in, dripping water on the hardwood floor. He's taken off his jacket, revealing his soaked dress shirt that now clings to him like a wet leaf to the pavement. His mouth is twisted in a cruel smile. The girl continues babbling, unaware of the third person in the house. He strolls over to the living room, rests his cold and clammy hands on my shoulder, squeezes. I feel myself deflate as he moves past me, rounds the coffee table, and makes his way over to the girl, who's still chattering. I try to focus on her words, but the only thing I hear is my heart pounding in my ears. Lightning flashes as he comes to a stop behind the girl and starts to run his wet fingers through her hair. The girl tells me about the time her mother painted her nails, a different color on each finger, red and blue and sparkling green, and... He slips his hand down into his pocket, pulls out something metallic that glints under the light from the lamp sitting in the corner. It's a knife, long and cruel, with a serrated blade, like a handsaw. He uses it to brush her hair. Tears prick my eyes. I dig my fingers into my palms, hard enough to draw blood. The girl doesn't notice. "Please," I whisper. "Don't." He bends over, places a soft kiss on the girl's cheek. It causes her head to tilt, but yet she rambles on, still unaware. "Don't look away," he says gruffly. "You have to watch." His grip tightens on his knife as he brings the sharp edge close to her skull. A sob shakes my chest as he starts sawing into her cranium. The grinding and scratching of steel on bone makes bile rise up to my throat, but I don't move, cannot move. Fear holds me down like iron bands strapped to my limbs. Blood pours out of her skull, down from her forehead onto her nose and lips, yet she doesn't stop talking about her mother, about the very woman he had murdered months ago. Self-loathing bubbles within me as I realize I want her to shut up, to at least realize what was being done to her. I know it's better, more humane that she doesn't feel any pain, but I want her to anyway. It would be better than whatever is happening right now. The unnaturalness of her inevitable demise is too much for me to bear. Her eyes droop, her voice starts to slur, and the knife continues to dig deeper. Finally, when the poor girl shudders and starts swaying on the chair, he yanks the blade away. But the nightmare hasn't ended. It still needs a finishing touch. He leans over, opens his mouth, and gently, almost lovingly, sinks his rows upon rows of jagged teeth into the wound in her skull. There is a wet, slurping noise as his barbed tongue works its way through the broken, bony cage and dips into the soft brain matter, sucks it up, and pushes it down into his throat. He is a messy eater. Soon, his lips and jaw and his wet dress shirt are stained with blood as he sucks up the rest of the girl's brain. He pushes himself up, takes a deep and satisfied breath. The girl's lifeless, brainless corpse hangs limp over the arm of the ladder-back chair. He turns his gaze towards me, wipes the blood off his face with the back of his hand, and grins. Soon. It's evening. The dying sun has broken through the cloud cover and is sending frail red fingers pushing up into the sky from beneath the horizon. I stand next to our bedroom window, lean on the wall for support. My limbs are heavy. Sharp stabs of pain shoot through my head. My eyes are red, my tear ducts having run dry hours ago, as I hear him hacking away at the girl's corpse in our backyard. I feel a strange sense of calm envelop me. I'm not scared anymore, for I know he's going to kill me, and I am going to embrace it with open arms. Thanks for listening, Wolfpack. If you want to submit your own story, the links for my email and subreddit will be down below. I've also created a Discord, so if you want to join that, the link will be in the description down below as well. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And with that said, have beautiful nightmares, and I will see you next time.